Hello. Thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. Now let's dive into the details of today's story. The moment I pulled into my driveway and saw Patricia standing in my garage with a stack of bills in her hand, I knew something had gone terribly wrong. My mother-in-law had that particular smile she wore when she believed she'd done something exceptionally clever. The kind that made my stomach tighten with dread. "Victoria," she called out cheerfully, waving the money like a trophy. Perfect timing. I have wonderful news. I stepped out of my Honda Civic, slowly scanning the garage. The space where my project car usually sat was conspicuously empty, just an oil stain on the concrete and the faint smell of motor oil lingering in the air. "Where's Cobra?" I asked quietly, though I already suspected the answer. Patricia's smile widened. "I sold that junky old car for you. Got $3,000 cash, which is probably more than that rust bucket was worth. You needed something more practical. Anyway, honey, a woman your age driving around in some beat-up sports car from the 60s. It was embarrassing. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt sideways. I stared at the empty space where I'd spent the last 4 years of my life meticulously restoring a 1967 Shelby Cobra. 427, not just any Cobra, but one of only 348 ever made. A car I'd purchased as a rusted shell and rebuilt from the ground up with my own hands. "You sold it," I repeated, my voice steady despite the hurricane building in my chest. "For your own good," Patricia said, smoothing her perfectly styled gray hair. "Mark agrees with me. You've been wasting too much time in this garage playing with car parts instead of focusing on more appropriate hobbies. Maybe now you'll take up something more suitable like gardening or cooking." I walked closer, noting the way she held the cash possessively against her chest. $3,000 for a car that had just been appraised at $400,000. "Who did you sell it to?" I asked. "Some young man who answered my Craigslist ad. Such a sweet boy, said he'd been looking for a project car just like this one. I told him it needed a lot of work, but he seemed excited about it." She beamed with satisfaction. "I even threw in all those expensive tools cluttering up the garage. My tools, my grandfather's tools, the Snap-on collection worth more than most people's cars, accumulated over 30 years of professional racing and restoration work, tools I'd inherited when he passed, along with his knowledge and passion for automotive engineering." "Patricia," I said carefully, "did you happen to keep any documentation from the sale?" "Of course I did. I'm not careless." She pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her purse. "Here's the bill of sale. Everything's perfectly legal." I took the paper with steady hands, though inside I was calculating just how monumentally she'd destroyed something irreplaceable. The bill of sale was handwritten on notebook paper, signed with barely legible names, no title transfer, proper identification recorded. "This young man," I said, "did he show you his driver's license? Get his address?" Patricia waved dismissively. "He paid cash. That's all that matters." "Really, Victoria? You should be thanking me. Now you can buy something sensible with that money. Maybe a nice set-in." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my pocket. "You know what, Patricia? You're absolutely right. Thank you for taking care of this me." The confusion that flickered across her face was almost worth the devastation. She'd expected an argument, tears, anger. Instead, I was giving her exactly what she wanted: gratitude and submission. "Well," she said, somewhat deflated by my response. "You're welcome. I just want what's best for you, dear. Mark will be so pleased when he gets home from his business trip." Mark, my husband of 6 years, who'd given his mother a key to our house for emergencies and never quite managed to set appropriate boundaries. Mark, who thought my hobby was cute but didn't really understand why I spent my weekends covered in grease instead of shopping or getting my nails done. "I'm sure he will be," I said, pulling out my phone. "Patricia, would you mind waiting here for just a moment? I need to make a quick call." She nodded, still counting the bills with obvious satisfaction. "Take your time, dear. I'll just tidy up this garage a bit while you're handling whatever business you need to." I walked to the far corner of the garage where the Wi-Fi signal was strongest and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Detective Martinez, this is Victoria Chin. I need to report a theft." "Victoria, what happened?" Detective Carmen Martinez had been a friend since college, back when we were both struggling through our respective programs. She in criminal justice, me mechanical engineering. She knew about my work, reputation in the vintage racing community, and the value of what I'd been building. "Someone sold my Cobra without permission," I said quietly, glancing back at Patricia, who was now rearranging my remaining tools with the confidence of someone who'd never held a wrench in her life. The 67. The one you've been restoring for Barrett Jackson. That's the one. Carmen's whistle was low and sympathetic. Jesus, Victoria. Who did it? My mother-in-law. She had access to the garage and thought she was doing me a favor by getting rid of my junk car for $3,000. There was a long pause. $3,000 for a numbers matching $427 Cobra. Apparently, she listed it on Craigslist as a project car that needed work. That's got to be the most expensive mistake in automotive history. What do you need from me? I've got the buyer's information from the bill of sale, but it's pretty sparse. Can you run what I have and see if we can track down where my car went? Absolutely. Text me everything you've got. And Victoria, I'm sorry. I know what that car meant to you. I glanced at Patricia, who was now trying to organize my socket sets by color rather than size. Thanks, Carmen. I'll send you the details now. After ending the call, I typed out buyer's information, what little there was, and sent it to Carmen. Then I walked back to where Patricia stood, her hands on her hips, surveying the garage like a general reviewing conquered territory. All taken care of, I said pleasantly. Now why don't you head home? Mark should be back from Chicago tomorrow evening, and I'm sure you'll want to tell him all about your successful sale. Of course, she gathered her purse and the cash, practically glowing with self-satisfaction. And remember, this is really for the best. You'll see. After she left, I stood alone in the garage, staring at the empty space where my Cobra had lived. For years of work, for years of research, hunting down original parts, of learning welding techniques from YouTube videos, of rebuilding that 427 big block engine by hand. For years of connecting with my grandfather's memory through every bolt I turned and every panel I straightened. Patricia saw junk. I saw art. The next morning, Carmen called with news. The name on the bill of sale is fake, she said without preamble. David Johnson, but the phone number doesn't exist, and there's no David Johnson at the address listed. Professional buyer. That's what I'm thinking. Someone who knows to scout Craigslist for undervalued classics, uses fake information, and probably flips them quickly through auction houses or private dealers. I leaned back in my office chair, staring out the window of the engineering firm where I worked as a senior consultant. So my car is probably already gone. Maybe not. I've got some contacts in the classic car world. Let me make some calls. See if anyone's heard about a Cobra suddenly appearing on the market. Thanks, Carmen. I owe you. Just promise me that when this is over, you'll let me take a ride in whatever car you build next. That afternoon, as I sat in a client meeting reviewing stress analyses for a new bridge design, my phone buzzed with a text from Mark. Mom told me about the car. Probably for best. Maybe now we can use the garage for storage like normal people. I stared at the message for a long moment, then turned my phone face down and returned my attention to the meeting. Some conversations were better had in person. Mark arrived home the next evening in his usual flurry of activity. Suitcase dropped in the entryway. Tie loosened. Already talking about his successful presentations in Chicago before he'd even properly said hello. Victoria, you should have seen the client's face when I showed them our cost projections, he said, loosening his tie. They practically signed the contract on spot. That's wonderful, I said from the kitchen where I was preparing dinner. How was your flight? Delayed, of course, but first class makes everything bearable. He wandered into the kitchen and kissed my cheek absently. Mom told me about the car situation. I have to say, I'm relieved. That thing was becoming an obsession. I continued stirring the pasta sauce, my movements calm and measured. Is that how you saw it? Come on, Vic. You spent every weekend in that garage. It was like being married to a mechanic. He laughed, clearly not noticing the tension in my shoulders. Now we can actually use this space for something practical. Maybe set up a home gym or create some proper storage. Your mother sold my car without permission, I said quietly. She was trying to help. You know how she is. Always thinking about what's best for family. He opened the refrigerator and grabbed a beer. Besides, $3,000 isn't bad for something that old. We can put it toward a nice vacation. I turned to face him, studying the man I'd married. Mark was handsome in a conventional way, tall, well-dressed, successful in his sales career. But standing in our kitchen, casually dismissing 4 years of my work as a minor inconvenience. He looked like a stranger. That car was worth $400,000, I said. Mark nearly choked on his beer. What? It was a 1967 Shelby Cobra, $427, one of 348 ever made. I've been restoring it to museum quality for the Barrett-Jackson auction in Scottsdale. The color drained from his face. You never told me it was worth that much. You never asked. In 6 years of marriage, you never once asked me about the technical aspects of what I was doing. Never inquired about the value. Never showed any interest beyond complaining that I spent too much time working on it. But $3,000. Mom said it was just an old project car. Your mother committed theft. She sold property that didn't belong to her for a fraction of its value to a buyer who gave false information. Mark set down his beer with shaking hands. Can we get it back? I don't know. The police are investigating, but the buyer used a fake name and address. Professional car thieves often use Craigslist to find exactly these kinds of opportunities. Expensive classics being sold by people who don't know their value. Oh God. What are we going to do? For the first time since I'd come home to find Patricia counting her cash. I smiled. Not the polite, controlled smile I'd been wearing for the past 2 days, but something colder. We are not going to do anything, Mark. I am going to continue working with the police to recover my property. You are going to have a very difficult conversation with your mother about boundaries and legal consequences. The next morning, broad call from Carmen that changed everything. I found your car, she said, excitement clear in her voice. I was my office, but I immediately closed the door and sat down heavily. Where? Scottsdale. A private collector named James Morrison bought it from a dealer yesterday. Paid $250,000, which means someone made a very nice profit flipping your Cobra. $250, it was worth $400 fully restored. The dealer probably told him it needed work. But here's the good news. Morrison is a legitimate collector, not a flipper. When I explained the situation, he was horrified. He's willing to cooperate fully. What does that mean? It means we can prove the chain of theft. Morrison has documentation from the dealer. The dealer has records from the original buyer, your fake David Johnson. And we have Patricia's bill of sale. It's a clear case of receiving stolen property. I leaned back in my chair, finally allowing myself to breathe. So we can get it back. We can get Morrison's insurance will cover his loss. The dealer is already cooperating to avoid criminal charges, and we're working with Scottsdale PD to trace the money trail. How long? Could be a few weeks for all the paperwork. But your car is being held as evidence. It's not going anywhere. That evening, I called a family meeting. Mark sat across from me at our dining room table, looking haggard and pale. Patricia arrived fashionably late, still carrying herself with the confidence of someone who believed she'd done a good deed. I don't understand why we need a formal meeting, she said, settling into her chair with a slight huff. I already explained everything to Mark. I sold that old car for a very reasonable price. Patricia, I said calmly, I need you to understand something very important. That car you sold was worth $400,000. She blinked. Don't be ridiculous, Victoria. It was a 1967 Shelby Cobra 427. One of the rarest and most valuable muscle cars ever made. I've spent 4 years restoring it to concours condition. Patricia's confident expression flickered. That's impossible. It looked like junk. That's because restoration is a process. What you saw as rust and primer was actually a car that had been completely disassembled with every component rebuilt or restored to original specifications. I pulled out my tablet and opened the photo album I'd been keeping throughout the restoration. This is what it looked like when I started. The first photo showed the Cobra as I'd found it. A rusted shell with no engine interior, sitting on blocks in a barn, Arizona. Patricia looked at it dismissively. See junk. I swiped to the next photo. This is after I'd media blasted the body and begun work. The shell gleamed with primer, every line clean and true. Another swipe. The engine rebuild. My grandfather's tools spread across the workbench. The 427 big block torn down to individual components. Each piece cleaned and measured and restored. Patricia's expression grew less certain with each image. The interior restoration. Hand-stitched leather seats. Original gauges rebuilt and recalibrated. A dashboard that looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line in 1967. The final assembly, everything coming together, chrome, gleaming, paint flawless. And this, I said, showing her the final photos, is what you sold for $3,000. The completed Cobra sat in our garage. Every surface perfect, every detail authentic. It looked like it had been transported through time from the Shelby factory, untouched by the decades. Patricia's face had gone ashen. I had no idea. The young man who bought it wasn't a sweet boy looking for a project car, I continued. He was a professional car thief who uses Craigslist to find exactly these situations. Valuable cars being sold by people who don't recognize their worth. Car thief. Mark's voice cracked. The name and address he gave were fake. The police are investigating, but he's probably done this before. Take advantage of family disputes, estate sales, or well-meaning relatives who think they're helping. Patricia was staring at the photos, her mouth slightly open. $400,000. That's what it was worth. The police have found it, by the way. A collector in Scottsdale bought it from a dealer for $250,000. He's cooperating with the investigation. So we can get it back? Patricia asked hopefully. I can get it back, I corrected. But there's something else you need to understand. What you did was theft. You sold property that didn't belong to you. The district attorney's office is reviewing the case for criminal charges. The silence that followed was profound. Patricia looked from me to Mark, then back to the photos on my tablet. Criminal charges, she whispered. Theft of property over $100,000 is a first-degree felony in this state. The mandatory minimum sentence is 2 years in prison. Mark buried his face in his hands. Mom, what did you do? I was trying to help, Patricia said, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. I thought it was just taking up space. You thought you knew better than I did about my own possessions, I said quietly. You decided that my interests and hobbies were inappropriate and took it upon yourself to fix my life according to your standards. Patricia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay you back. With what money? You have $3,000. The car was worth $400,000. We'll figure something out, Mark said desperately. Maybe we can take out loans. Or Mark, I said, my voice firm enough to cut through his panic. I want you to be very clear about something. Your mother committed a felony. She stole property worth more than most people's houses. This isn't something you can fix with good intentions and a payment plan. Over the next 2 weeks, as police investigation proceeded and the legal machinery ground into motion, I watched my family dynamic shift in ways I hadn't anticipated. Mark, faced with the reality of his mother's actions and their consequences, began to see our relationship differently. He'd spent years minimizing my interest in supporting his mother's interference because it was easier than confronting the family dynamics he'd grown up with. Now forced to acknowledge that my hobby was actually a sophisticated technical skill worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. He was struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he'd married with the expert craftsperson I'd always been. I never realized. He said one evening as we sat in the kitchen. I mean, I knew you were good with cars, but I didn't understand. You want to understand, I replied. It was easier to dismiss it as a quirky hobby than to recognize that I might have expertise in something you knew nothing about. The legal resolution came faster than I'd expected. Morrison, the collector in Scottsdale, was indeed everything Carmen had said, horrified by the situation and eager to cooperate. The dealer who had sold him the car agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. The money trail led back to the original thief, who turned out to be part of a larger operation targeting classic cars. Patricia, faced with the possibility of prison time and the reality of what she destroyed, accepted a plea agreement. 5 years probation, restitution payments, and community service, but the damage to our family relationships was permanent. Mark and I entered counseling, but it became clear that this incident had revealed fundamental incompatibilities we'd both been avoiding. He needed a wife who fit his image of conventional success. Someone whose achievements complemented his rather than challenging his understanding of the world. I needed a partner who could respect my expertise and interests even when they fell outside his experience. 6 months after Patricia sold my car, Mark and I signed divorce papers. It was amicable, all things considered. He kept the house with its empty garage. I took my tools, the ones that hadn't been sold, and moved to a small place outside the city with a 2-car garage and room to work. The Cobra was returned to me in perfect condition, apparently none the worse for its adventure in theft and recovery. Morrison had stored it properly and even had his own mechanic perform a full inspection to ensure no damage had occurred during transport. But I'd lost the desire to finish that particular project. Too much had happened. Too many associations had been tainted. Instead, I sold it myself properly, this time through Barrett-Jackson with full documentation and provenance. It brought $420,000 to auction. With that money, I bought something I'd always dreamed of but never thought I could afford. A 1970 Plymouth Huda that had been languishing in a barn for 30 years. Not as rare the Cobra, but more personally meaningful. My grandfather had owned one just like it, had taught me to drive in one just like it. This time though, I was building it for myself. Not for auction, not investment, just for the pure joy of taking something broken and making it beautiful again. On weekends, I work in my garage with the doors open, music playing, tools spread across the workbench exactly the way my grandfather taught me. Neighbors stop by sometimes, curious about the old car taking shape under my hands. Some of them are surprised to find a woman doing the work, but most are just impressed by the craftsmanship. Mark sends occasional texts, usually on holidays or anniversaries. He's dating someone new, he tells me. Someone who appreciates the finer things in life. I always text back politely, wishing him well. Patricia and I don't speak at all anymore. That's probably for the best. Last month, Carmen stopped by to see the Cuba's progress. She ran her hands over the freshly painted panels, admiring the deep plum metallic that seemed to glow even in the fluorescent garage lighting. You know, she said, I think this one's going to be even better than the Cobra. I smiled, wiping grease from my hands with an old shop rag. Different goals this time. The Cobra was about proving I could do museum quality work. This one's about remembering why I fell in love with cars in the first place. And how's that going? I looked at the Cuda, still months away from completion, but already showing the promise of what it would become. Every curve was perfect. Component chosen with care. Every detail a reflection of decades accumulated knowledge and skill. Better than I expected, I said. Turns out when you're building something for yourself instead of for other people's approval, the work is a lot more satisfying. Carmen laughed. Sounds like you learned more than just automotive repair from this whole experience. Maybe I had. Maybe sometimes it takes someone else trying to steal your dreams to help you realize what those dreams actually mean to you. And maybe sometimes the thing that looks like worst betrayal becomes the catalyst for the life you were always meant to.